And welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning, visiting with Keith Hohottle from what was Quest Recovery Services, but we'll get into that more.
Sure.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Keith, let's start right off the fact that most of us are familiar with the good work that Quest Recovery Services has done over the years. Give us a little bit of background about Quest, how it got started, how long it's been around.
Sure, absolutely, Susie. Thanks for having me today. So Quest Recovery and Prevention in its current shape was late 60s, early 70s, a combination of the drug assistance and alcohol assistance organizations in the community that came together to form a drug and alcohol agency, because for some reason we used to treat them independently in two different locations. So since about 1970, 1969, Quest Recovery and Prevention has been around providing drug and alcohol treatment, education, prevention services to Stark County.
The prevention part, what kind of programs do you have going?
So we have a couple different prevention programs in 13 school districts. We have some that are selected where the school system and the guidance counselors have selected some potential at-risk folks to be in programming. And then we do some universal programs where we're just giving some general education. They start anywhere from 7th and 8th grade all the way through high school. And then this past year, we added a somewhat theater production called The Farming Effects. So we got a grant from the Paul and Carol David Foundation to create this play that talks about prescription drug abuse. Mm-hmm. And I think we've performed it, I want to say about 6 or 7 times throughout the community.
Nice. What do you see as far as, is it getting better? Is it just changing as far as drug of choice? What are you seeing?
So I wish I could tell you it was all better.
Yeah.
As you and probably the listening audience knows, the heroin epidemic has been pretty significant in our community and across the state of Ohio. So we're seeing changing faces and changing drug of choice in treatment. For the longest time, probably until about 2011 or so, most of the folks that we saw either had alcohol use disorders or marijuana or cocaine. And then as we got more and more heroin and prescription drugs, opiate stuff come in, that has changed. So it's changed the demographics by age. I read something not too long ago that it used to take somebody about 20 years of substance use before they got to treatment. So we were seeing people usually in their late 30s, early 40s. And now I think the average age of folks seeking services is around 22 to 26 years old. So it's changed considerably.
You've mentioned prescription drugs a couple of times. Mm-hmm. Does that seem to be it's almost a passive gateway? It's not intentional. But are we seeing more and more of that as far as this opiate crisis, that's how people become dependent?
We seem to be. So a few years ago when we heard about the pill mills, where people were prescribing just huge quantities of prescription opiates, OxyContin and Vicodin and things like that, and as those got closed up, we were left with a whole bunch of folks who were physically dependent on that, and as those closed up and heroin became more and more available, people moved on to that. But again, opiates by nature are tremendous pain relievers and have a great place in medicine. However, when they're abused, then we have folks that become addicted and have a hard time getting off. And I think the one thing that people need to realize is that, chemically, they're created to build tolerance, and that when people stop taking them, there is that physical withdrawal. And this isn't experimental alcohol use, experimental marijuana use. People get dependent upon these rather quickly in the progression of the disease. So, that's a message that we need to continue to convey to the general public.
Is there something in place where you're working with the medical community? Because I know that, they take that oath, do no harm. Mm-hmm. And when they're prescribing these medications, the last thing on their minds is to be doing any harm to a person. Certainly their goal is not that anyone become hooked on
Right.
it. Is there something in place where you're working with doctors or anyone in the medical profession to kind of work through this together?
So I think there's awareness that goes across the state, and doctors and those who are able to prescribe are all responsible providers or prescribers. So I think as awareness increases, the challenge that doctors have is that when somebody reports that they have pain, they have some responsibility to help manage that pain.
Yes.
And without sometimes knowing the other motives that people have. So I think that there's been a considerable amount of awareness raised in prescribing habits. I think that when we have opportunities to interact with them, either our own personal doctors or in the community, I think we've had really, really good conversations with each other. So,
So good work that you're doing. All right. Well, you have recently kind of changed names. There's been a merger. You're doing much, much more than ever before.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So, Community Services of Stark County, which was founded in 1919 and is currently the oldest behavioral health organization in the community, and Quest Recovery and Prevention Services completed a merger of programs and services on August the 3rd of this past summer. So what kind of drove that is a couple years ago when my former boss retired, he says, there's only one person that's allowed to be your mentor now, and that's Dan Fuelline. so Dan and I started having lunch and breakfast together and found some common areas where on the Quest side we were looking to provide a few more mental health services, and on the community services side they recognized there was a need to provide some additional drug and alcohol services. So we shared an office in Alliance for a little while, and as time went on and Dan got closer to retiring, we had some meetings with a few select board members, and then finally a bigger group, and found that we had some common ground to merge those programs and services. I think as we looked at where we were going, so the new organization, ComQuest Services, has divisions of community services and Quest. We wanted to maintain the integrity in the brands that we had. So as we merge these programs and services and now have almost a complete continuum of care on both the mental health side and the drug and alcohol side, all the way from ambulatory detox or outpatient detox for opiates through residential treatment, including prescribers for mental health medications such as psychiatrists, we recognized that was a good situation for our clients rather than having them move back and forth from agency to agency. We also recognize that in the transformation of behavioral health and the Medicaid managed care, that it puts us in a much better position to get through that competitively, and also to provide a good continuum of care of services for the clients and the community at large.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Keith Hohotl. He's the president and CEO of now ComQuest Services. You are doing some things that people might be surprised to find out now with this recent merger.
Sure.
Let's bring up some of these. For one thing, adoption.
Right. So Community Services has long had a program called Loving Choice Adoption, and I believe this past year we had 14 children adopted. So it is exciting. I have been able to witness one of those. It was everything that I thought it might plus more. It was tearful. It was exciting. It was pretty cool. Mm-hmm. So that is something that I was not familiar with until we started going through this process. But boy, it certainly gives families another choice on both sides. And I think as a Christian man, that's important that we offer that service.
It gets to be a little trickier, doesn't it, when you're talking about a baby of a parent who is an addict going into a loving home? What kinds of special services are there in place to make sure that child has every opportunity to have a healthy life?
So I think within the community, the neonatal abstinence programs that Altman has and Akron Children's has and some of the other hospitals have been extremely helpful in identifying those symptoms early on and then being able to share that with adoptive parents and also with the birth mothers, whether they choose adoption or whether they choose to keep their child. I think that's really, really key to all of this, is explaining what that looks like. As you know, Stark County had not the greatest infant mortality,
right.
And I believe through the hard work of the health department and the hospitals and that it will continue to improve. But again, this gives folks another option, and so we're doing our best to educate those in situations like that.
And you're talking again about that 20-something age group for the most part,
Yep.
probably.
Yep.
Wow. With as much as we have known, for as long as we have known it, what more can be done? The message is out there, right? How is it not getting through? Why is this still a problem?
Well, I think that it's still a problem because we know that addiction's a chronic disease.
Wow,
That people have relationships with all kinds of different things. We have relationships with the clothes we wear, the people we're with, the cars we drive, our job. And it's interesting, I tell my classes at Malone that I teach, I said, there are very few things that we stay in relationships with that create havoc in our lives like addiction does. And, so if I go out to eat someplace and I get sick, I'm probably not going to ever have whatever made me sick, and I'm probably maybe not even going to go back to that restaurant.
Right.
But for some reason in addiction, people can lose families, jobs, cars, freedom, and they continue to stay in that relationship with that substance, and it becomes extremely challenging to change that. So when we talk about recovery not only as a thought but also a feeling, to me, changing that lifestyle and building a relationship with recovery means that when somebody's truly working in recovery, then if something bad goes on, the first thought is, boy, I have to go use. The first thought is, boy, what did I do that I need to change to fix this? And with a few years of recovery under my belt now, it's interesting as I hear people talk, and I think we just need to continue to tell people, recovery is a lifestyle that's okay. People don't have to use drugs. People don't have to use alcohol. I remember when I was doing adolescent drug and alcohol treatment, and one young man who was about 16, he thought he wasn't ever going to be able to get married if he stopped drinking because he'd never been to a wedding reception where they didn't toast with champagne.
Wow.
So, well, there are alternatives. So those are the messages and some of the myths that we have to change. And we only do that by having conversations like this within our community, and having more and more of them as we're able to.
So there's a change in mindset, a change in thinking patterns. These are the kinds of things that a person goes through, yes, when they go into recovery.
Oh, absolutely. It really, somebody told me a long time ago, there's only one thing you have to change, and it's everything. You change where you go, you change who you talk to, you change what you talk about. And those are all conversations and thoughts and feelings that need to be different.
We're going to have to take a break. I want to give you a heads up on when we come back after our break. Let's talk about some of the warning signs, some flags that parents and friends and people who care about people that they're concerned about might be on the watch for.
Absolutely.
And lots of other things that you're involved with that I think people will be quite surprised. We're speaking with Keith Hohotl. He's the president and CEO of ComQuest Services, and you are listening to Our Community. Stay with us.